Okay, so has the FIFA Club World Cup been a success or a failure? Now, the reason why I posed the question this way is, yeah, I don't think it's been as successful as FIFA would have hoped. I don't think they've got the European and Asian TV audience that they wanted. If I'm being honest, they haven't got the crowd attendance and crowd interest in the US that I think they were hoping for, and I think they've got their pricing horribly wrong because we've seen in the knockout stages when people were booking their tickets, they're paying three, four, $500. Then they're not selling. So with dynamic pricing, if you bought a ticket initially at three, four, $500, you're paying one price, and then suddenly they're dropping the prices to 19, 20, 30, 40, $50, and even that's not filling out stadiums. Having the kick-off times in the heat of the day in the US for the European TV audience has not worked. There's another problem, and I don't think FIFA have quite twigged that there's a lot of sport taking place mostly in Europe right now. We've got Wimbledon, we've got the Tour de France, we've got the Women's Euros, which may I just say, the attendance and the viewership figures have been pretty strong. Now, not everyone likes women's football, and that's fine, and they're entitled to their opinion, but the ticket sales have been brilliant. Records have actually been broken for women's Euros group games, not including the host nation. They've already broken the attendance record. We've obviously had Le Mans recently and a few of the other endurance motorsport races. So we've had Spa and we've had the Nürburgring 24 hour. We've got Wimbledon, we've got the Tour de France, we've got MotoGP and World Superbikes also in the middle of their European season. And so there's a lot of major sporting events where sports fans would rather watch them, and that's a fact. Further else around the world, we've had State of Origin in this period in Australia with the Rugby League, and that basically shuts down the nation. And I'm not joking, the viewership figures for State of Origin are some of the highest watched sporting events in a calendar year in Australia and New Zealand. And so, even with having these earlier kick-off times, which may actually work for the Australian and New Zealand TV audience, because they're sports mad nations, admittedly smaller populations, they're more interested in what's happening in the Rugby League State of Origin, because that is the big thing. I mean, this is the problem. They've kept the kick-off times earlier for the European and Asian and even Australasian TV markets, because these are sports mad locations. The best players are based in Europe. The best clubs are in South America and Europe, and parts of South America are 2 to 3 hours ahead of the east coast of the US. And so this is where we want to maximise that TV audience. It hasn't been well promoted. I'm not certain on how well it's been promoted in the US in the cities that have been hosting games. But here's another issue. With having these earlier kick-off times, the heat has had an impact. We've had weather delays, obviously, but also a lot of Americans are at work. So who would be attending? If Americans domestically work mostly 9 to 5, most Americans work 9 to 5. You'll also have those factory shift workers and those industrial shift workers, but a lot of Americans are at work. So who's going to attend? Retirees and stay-at-home mum and dads with their kids. And do you really expect like a kindergarten age kid with mum or dad who's a stay-at-home parent to sit in a stadium that's over 40 degrees Celsius for 2 to 3 hours? Do you really expect that? No. The ticketing pricing has been wrong. They've overpriced the tickets. They're not getting the fans through the gates they expected. Yes, they've got the backing of the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia and DAZN, but they've also struggled to find host broadcasters over here in Europe. They were very, very keen to get free-to-air broadcasters. So for the UK, for example, where I'm from, Channel 5 picked up a handful of games because BBC and ITV have got the Women's Euros, Wimbledon, Tour de France. Sky Sports here has got the F1. TNT Sports has got the MotoGP and the World Superbikes. So they've already spent their allocated money on their TV rights during the last TV rights cycle. They're not going to spend money on a tournament which used to be only a handful of clubs, which has now been expanded to basically a World Cup standard size competition, when they've already spent their budget for this TV rights cycle on the various sporting events that they're going to be broadcasting. And as I say, it hasn't been well received here in Europe for the most part. There are some fans who are going to watch their club, obviously. There are some die-hard fans who will watch as many games as they can because they're passionate about the sport, and that's fine. But I don't think FIFA have quite twigged that there's a lot of other major sporting events that draw a lot of eyeballs at this time of year. Another major mistake I think FIFA made many years ago was scrapping the Confederations Cup, which was generally seen as a warm-up event for the following year's World Cup. Now, what that basically meant, to qualify for the Confederations Cup, you had to win your confederation. So you had to be European champion, African champion, South American champion, etc., etc., internationally. And of course, the host nation will get automatic qualification. So if the Confederations Cup was to take place this year, hypothetically, you would have US, Canada, and Mexico. Now, that would mean an expanded Confederations Cup for the first time. But the Confederations Cup was seen as a warm-up event for the next year's World Cup. And I always love watching the Confederations Cup. We got to see some competitive, meaningful international football where at the end of it, you actually win a meaningful trophy. It was a brilliant little tournament. And it was always seen as a good warm-up for the World Cup the next year so they could iron out any issues with stadiums, fan accessibility, player welfare, for example. They could experiment with new rules, for example. It was always seen as a really good test bed to make sure all these issues were ironed out for the following year's World Cup, where accessibility to stadiums, transport infrastructure could be tweaked a little bit, the fan experience could be tweaked a little bit. We also got to see some really great players that otherwise would not have qualified for the World Cup with their nation, because for whatever reason, some teams do really well in Euros or Copa Americas, but they don't necessarily qualify for a World Cup. And we got to see some players that we wouldn't see the following year, and that meant some players put themselves in the shop window. A lot of the host nations generally did quite well as well. I remember the South African Confederations Cup in 2009. South Africa made the final. They played really well. The following year they didn't, but we got to see new players, new faces, and it was always a fun, well-supported tournament that actually did well with the European TV market. FIFA decided to do away with the Confederations Cup, which I actually think was a massive, massive mistake on FIFA's part. They have decided to expand this Club World Cup, and the only reason I can think of why is money. Money. And I don't think it's worked. I don't think it's been successful. And when you've got high-profile players and high-profile coaches and administrators criticising the tournament, I will use Jurgen Klopp as the example here, saying it's not the best idea to have so many extra club games. We need to have a proper off-season. The players need rest and recuperation. Fans are oversaturated. And he's come out and criticised it. The Red Bull Group owns, several clubs, and he's the Red Bull's, director. I think it's director of football development. He's got an administrative role now within the Red Bull football organisation. When one of his clubs was playing at the tournament, and he's coming out and saying, "Yeah, this is not the best idea." Let's be honest. That tells you a lot about the decision making behind it. When you're not listening to the sports people, when you are basically lawyers and CEO, business executives, and you're not listening to the people who actually day to day work at the coalface, be it coaching or playing, at whatever, at the various levels, when you're not listening to them, that is a massive dysfunction. The attendance has been an issue, which raises concerns about next year's World Cup. FIFA need to look at their ticketing policy because the prices are too high. And then you've got the geopolitics with the US right now, with some of their, political decisions the US is making with its foreign and domestic policy. And that's having an impact, their economic policy. And I don't like getting politics involved in sport, but that is also having an impact. Travel to the US from overseas is down significantly so far this year. I think that's also having an impact. Overseas fans are less willing to travel. The domestic fan base, the timings are at the wrong time of day. The pricing is too high. And when you're trying to grow the fan base of the sport, I don't think this is the best way to do it. A Confederations Cup would have been brilliant because it would also have meant Canada and Mexico could also test out some of their facilities. It would give, if it was a Confederations Cup, you could see Canada, US and Mexico as all co-hosts. Games could be hosted in all three nations. And you could see them test out their stadiums, test out the stadium infrastructure, give their players meaningful games that actually mean something, so the coaches can, see how their players are developing under their system. We don't have that. We have club games, and we've already had a very lengthy club season, and the players aren't getting rest, so the quality's not as good. The weather's had an impact, so therefore I don't think it's been successful. I think it has been more of a failure. There'll be some fans that have enjoyed the tournament, sure, and that point is valid. That they are allowed to have that valid opinion. But personally, under my personal thoughts, it hasn't been well promoted. It's clashing with too many more established sporting events that have a big following, where there's a lot of eyes, where a lot of casual sports fans are more likely to watch Wimbledon. They're more likely to watch the Women's Euros. Families, especially families which are key, which is where you want your future growth, more likely to watch the Women's Euros. More likely to watch Wimbledon, for example. The Tour de France. These are big, major international sporting events that have been well established, that are well organised, that have really strong media rights deals with all the related advertising and sponsorship and the corporate investment. This is where, to get this tournament off the ground and expanded, they had to use the public investment fund from Saudi Arabia to basically bankroll it. So there's your catch. Anyone worth their salt is not watching it. It hasn't been well promoted. There's been issues finding broadcasters, apart from DAZN, which is Saudi backed, in some of the European and Asian markets to broadcast the games. It's not been, in my opinion, a great success for FIFA, and it also raises concerns about what we could potentially see next year with the World Cup. The players last year, for example, at the Euros, struggled in the sense of the intensity of the games, the quality of the games. Players looked tired. Same at the Copa America. Players looked out on their feet. They looked tired. The games were not played at the same intensity we've seen in previous years. The schedule is too condensed. There's too much going on. The off-season isn't long enough. They need rest and recuperation. And when you've got high-profile players like Rodri, who had a season-ending injury a few days after he stated, we are playing too many games, we need to have a proper off-season. We need to rest and recuperate. If you want to see the highest quality football, you need to let us rest our bodies. We need time we're playing too much. And people will say, well, football is not as physical as some other team sports. And that is true. The rules have changed. There is less physical. The tackling has changed. There's less physical contact than there used to be. It's still a contact sport. But other much tougher contact sports have brought in rules to what we call load management, where they're limiting the amount of training hours, as in contact and non-contact training. They're limiting the amount of games players can play, mostly rugby union and rugby league, but they are making sure that the training sessions, there's more non-contact than contact. Matches, they're trying to cap the amount of games. Players' unions have a bigger voice when it comes to their CBA agreements in sports like this, saying we actually need to look at welfare, and they're bringing in more welfare-based rules as well in regards to concussion, rehabilitation, injury rehabilitation, and also more protocols to concern player welfare. So I think FIFA have got this wrong. They're putting too many games into the international and club calendar. Also, the other the basic confederations, such as UEFA and CONMEBOL, are also putting in too many games into the schedule and less recuperation time. So I think FIFA made a mistake over a decade ago scrapping the Confederations Cup. It was a short, sharp international tournament, which got a lot of eyeballs. It was a fun tournament, and it was a good test bed for the following year's World Cup in regards to stadium infrastructure, fan accessibility, fan experience, fan zones, transport infrastructure to and from the stadiums. And also it was a good test bed for some teams going into an international tournament, players getting together into an international camp, that preparation. Because it was a smaller tournament, more players had time off with their off-season. We're not getting that anymore. And I think FIFA have chased the money over quality. They've gone for a cash grab over actual quality tournament where fans feel engaged. But that's my views on it. Place your thoughts in the comments section below. I'll be very interested to hear from football/soccer fans around the world how they feel about the Club World Cup. Have FIFA timed it the wrong time of year? Is it too big a tournament? Should they basically have kept the Confederations Cup as a tournament rather than this expanded Club World Cup? pricing, kickoff times, chasing a TV audience that if the games were later, even then potentially wouldn't have watched anyway because of the major clashes with other more established sporting competitions and international sporting events. Have they gone down a rabbit hole that is going to be a slippery slope, which is going to be hard to extricate themselves from? FIFA taking the game in the wrong direction. That's a question I'm posing. But from me for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.